perfect
You're
time.
wearing your Peoria t-shirt.
Oh yeah. Hold on. I wanted to. This is important stuff here. I wanted to show off my T-shirt. Peoria. Hold on. Let's see if we can see.
Pull holes. Yeah.
Oh, how'd you get that?
Legit original T-shirt. We have a beloved congregant who's now like a grandparent to our kids, who worked for the minor league team there and gave me this shirt.
And Pujols played there?
Yeah, sure. When he was in Single A.
Wow.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I totally forgot. Thank you for noticing, so I could totally show off my swag. Okay. Welcome back to Talmud. So we have been going through Tractate Brachot. Was the idea. We were going to start Brachot. So we're looking at this under
by another tractate of Talmud.
I did exactly. Good. I'm glad you got one. So with Brachot, we've really been having two different conversations to start with. We've been talking about Brachot with the subject that it seems to have, which is the idea of prayer. But really the underlying conversation that we've been looking at so far is this question of rabbinic authority and legitimacy and the creation of sort of the mythology that becomes rabbinic Judaism. Because these people are sort of writing their own story as they tell it. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Right, just as a reminder, a little bit on some of the history here. When we're around the year 0, before the destruction of the temple, today probably our understanding of this is that the rabbis are really a fringy group dealing with a fringy group that is in no way mainstream and in no way holds mainstream power. Or legitimacy or authority or authenticity or whatever word you want to put in there. But if you fast forward 1,000 years, rabbinic Judaism basically is mainstream Judaism. There still is a different kind of Judaism, Karaite Judaism, but you fast forward 1,000 years and that's what you get. Okay. Any questions on that kind of quick and dirty history and background before we jump in?
Do they have any ideas of why the rabbinic Judaism ended up being considered the mainstream?
Yeah, that's a great question. So if we go back to the time period just before the destruction of the temple, so we're talking basically the time of Jesus, right? We have all of these different types. Yeah, it's not fair to say. This is an area that's under military occupation by the Romans. And like almost any military occupation, long-term military occupation, there are theological, nationalistic rebellions that come out of it, right? Like, remember that ISIS starts as a reaction to the American occupation, right? I mean, a long, long time ago, many cycles backwards, right? And so the theology and all of that, it's tied in. So there are all of these different splinter groups that exist at the time, but by and large, the only legitimate group was the temple and the operations of the temple. And so what ends up happening is, the other piece to know is background here, somewhere like 10% of the Roman Empire during this time, and there's a wide range of estimates, but somewhere around 10% of the Roman Empire are Jews during this time period. And another 10% or so are in some ways Jewish or non-Jewish followers of the Jewish God or admirers of the Jewish people or of the Jewish religion, or these words don't quite work for back in that time period. But so what we get is that after the destruction of the temple, when you can't do temple Judaism anymore, these two other groups, Rabbinic Judaism, which has this claim of how you can do Judaism at home with this oral tradition or in community with this oral tradition, wherever you are, and has this whole notion of prayer rather than sacrifice, right? And that's why we're looking at Brachot in this tractate. You can see why that kind of group that had been around for a while, even if they'd been fringy, all of a sudden, particularly over time, over the course of a millennia, would gain in legitimacy. Does that make sense, Toby?
Yeah, I
The-
remember in a class that I took, the idea that we were given was that the switch to rabbinic Judaism was happening before the destruction of the temple, and that just moved it along. But from what you're saying and what we're seeing, I'm not so convinced that that was accurate.
Yeah, so as I understand this, and I am not an expert in this, and I'm sure I'm a couple years out of date. I haven't taught this like in a college setting in 3, 4, 5 years
Right.
now.
You wait 2 years and someone comes up with another.
Yeah, right.
estimate.
But my understanding of this is that newer research, particularly American research, is much more dismissive of the role or of any sort of reality of rabbinic authority or centrality in the time before the destruction of the temple.
Okay.
Does that make sense? I think that's been the
Yeah,
real change.
but it was a fringe idea that came into its own as a result of the
Correct.
destruction.
Correct. The other piece to say here is that 10% or so of the Roman Empire who were non-Jewish followers of, but in some way Jewish, those are the people who became Christians, right? Because Christianity, Pauline Christianity had a way of entrance that, first of all, did not involve circumcision, and also was much more a universal thing, right? It was a faith rather than a people. Okay, any other questions or thoughts on this before we jump into the Talmud itself?
What about the connection between like early struggles between like the Pharisees and Sadducee groups back in like the Hasmonean era? Was that kind of a part of, how related were they to the rabbinic group that we see here in the Talmud? Were they pretty far separated? Were they still kind of ideologically similar?
Yeah, so now we're dealing with Josephus, right? Who is, are there other sources?
Post Maccabees era. I mean, did Phileo have anything? I don't remember.
I don't know. Yeah, it's been so long since I have studied that like I can tell you my best guess on this. But yeah, my understanding is that all of this also falls into that category of later rabbinic authority projected into the past. That there are significant layers of that happen in the storytelling.
The appropriation of this original group that had tensions in the Hasmonean Empire, and then the Pharisees are saying, well, we're legitimate because we can connect ourselves back to them. So is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, exactly. Or to say it directly within the Talmud. Within the Talmud, we come across, well, we have these two texts, right? We have the Mishnah and then the Gemara written on top of it. But we have two kinds of rabbis that we find. We have the Tanaim, who are the rabbis of the Mishnah, basically. And we have the Amoraim, who are the rabbis of the Gemara, of the later Talmud. And so often in the Talmud, we spend our time resolving conflicts between the Tanaim, between the rabbis of the Mishnah, because it's taken as like, you have to, they can't possibly have disagreed with each other because we all know that they're all right? Like that's the work that the later Amoraim do for the Tanaim. The irony of it is that the later Amoraim almost certainly actually have more authority within their community than the authority that they are imagining within the community of the Tanaim that they revere. I think I said all of those words right. Did that make sense?
Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Hey, Sarah, did you cut your hair? Sarah,
Did
you
I?
give yourself a haircut?
I did.
Whoa.
I was always been shaved. It was just a smidge longer.
We shaved all of our kids' hair this week too, so
I saw the picture.
We saw that.
Okay, any other thoughts, questions, anything before we dive into text?
Did this happen? Have a lot of physical violence among the rabbis and students during the writing a lot of this Talmud?
Yeah, there's all sorts of stories of people fighting, like fist fights in the yeshiva. Yeah, absolutely.
They have that now?
Yeah, tons of them. There's also stories of like yeshivas that go to war, There's during the Talmudic era, there's a whole kingdom within sort of what we think of as Greater Babylon that is established and declared by Jews living there, rabbinic Jews. It does not end well for those people. But yeah. Okay, any other questions? Totally fine for there to be these questions. We're at the beginning of this, so yeah. Okay, let's jump into some text. Where are you, brachot? There you are. Everyone's seeing this, yeah?
Yep.
Yes. Well, I am.
So tell me where we are so I can find it.
Hold on, and I will tell you. No thanks.
There's all kinds of introductions.
Okay. No, I do not want to ever use Microsoft Edge again. Okay, let's see where we are here. Nope, we're not on 5A. Anyone remember where we stopped? Let's see. I should have marked this down. That would have been a thoughtful, smart thing to do last week, huh?
Stop flicking and let me look.
Okay, here we go. Here's the beginning of the Gemara. Source of
Ladder, two roads.
Wait for the-
Go on. The Gemara proceeds to clarify.
Yeah, this we all read.
It was two at the sunsets. Yeah, we did the sunsets. Ultimately,
I remember we
I think we're about 4A.
yeah, it might enter your mind to say,
I remember the
okay,
same.
Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi
I think it's right about here.
What page is that?
The poor person and the priest the same. Keep going.
Yeah.
We were further.
Yeah, we were further than that.
We were further. I remember having a long discussion about this. The preceding was the text of the Bereta, the poor person, the priest, the one. Further, go down further. Rather, having this, yeah, okay.
there were a couple of
We didn't
verses-
get to that page with all these things on it. Having established time of purpose different. Yeah, we did that. It's the next. Could you go to the next page? We learned that the master said and berated the time. We're around here.
Yeah, I think because we stopped talking and we were talking about Rabbi Meir because of
Yeah, that's where we are.
kind
Yehuda
Yeah.
said to Meir, yeah,
yeah.
that's where we are.
Yeah, talking
Okay.
about when night begins.
Okay, let's try right here. Let me see. I can probably make this bigger. Yep, there we go. Is this big enough for you? Can everyone read it?
Yeah.
What is on the left there? I think I accidentally drew on this somehow. I have no idea how I did that. Do you all see that too? The weird
No.
yellow
Yeah.
line?
No.
Yeah.
Okay, whatever.
Other
I'm
people
hoping
see
not.
it. I don't see it.
Actually on my screen.
Oh, I see it. It's just a little scribble. No big deal.
What's going on? Whatever. Okay. Who wants to read for us?
Okay, the Gemara answers that Rabbi Meir said to Rabbi Yehuda as follows. Do you maintain that I'm speaking of your definition of twilight? I am speaking of Rabbi Yossi's definition of twilight. As Rabbi Yossi said, twilight is like the blink of an eye. Night begins and day ends, and the time between them is so brief it is impossible to quantify. According to this opinion, the priests immerse themselves just before the emergence of the stars when it is already considered night. Boy, is that a slap in the face. Do you
Okay,
think I'm talking about you? No, I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about what Rabbi Yossi said.
Okay. Yeah, we're definitely dealing with authority here. Anyone else see something here worth commenting on?
Narc.
No.
What are they alluding to with the twilight? I mean, we talked
Should-
about the
should
Shema
we- Should
earlier.
we start with the previous paragraph? Would that explain it? I see there what Rabbi Yehuda said there it seems, and how can connected a fundamental dispute over when night begins. Let's do that paragraph. That'll
Go for it, Bobby. Will you read it for us?
The Gemara notes what Rabbi Yehuda said to Rabbi Meir seems correct, and how can Rabbi Meir respond? Rabbi Meir's response is connected to the fundamental dispute over when night begins. After sunset, a period begins which is neither day nor night. The Tanaim disagree over the precise duration of this period, known as twilight. That's nice in Hebrew. Dain Hashemashot. Ooh, that's pretty. Rabbi Yehuda holds that twilight extends a full hour after sunset. Rabbi Nehemiah agrees in principle, though he disagrees over the specifics. Rabbi Yosef maintains that twilight is very brief and occurs immediately before the emergence of the stars, which marks the beginning of the night. Regarding Rabbi Meir's argument, Rabbi Yehuda asks that since the priests immerse themselves before twilight, they have a long wait until nightfall. Clearly, their immersion takes place while it is still day. Oh, I love this. This is such pill-pull.
There we go. Sorry, I was figuring out there with the drawing on the screen. Someone was drawing on the screen. I don't know who it was.
Okay, so then it fits in the paragraph I read.
Yeah.
That says the Gemara answers that Rabbi Meir said to Rabbi Yehuda as follows. Do you maintain that I'm speaking of your definition of twilight? I am speaking of Rabbi Yossi's definition of twilight. As Rabbi Yossi said, twilight is like the blink of an eye. Night begins and day ends, and the time between them is so brief it is impossible to quantify. According to this opinion, the priests immerse themselves just before the emergence of the stars when it is already considered night.
Okay, what is this conversation at a broader level, at a more meta level?
What are they talking about? The priest immersion. What is that? It almost like
That's when they can, after they immerse, then they can eat.
So Bobby, yeah, mikvah. That's what we're talking about.
Right.
So
So
okay.
one is saying that twilight lasts for an hour, between sunset and when the stars come out. The
That
other
makes
one says, no, twilight is a blink of an eye and the priests can't immerse themselves until it's night, between the time it's dark and the time the three stars come out.
Nice. Let's back away from this even further. What's the real nature of the conversation that they're trying to have here? You even have a sense?
Well, I was thinking, I know I'm wrong, but I was just thinking about it because we were talking about it earlier. Purity or impurity? How to purity, to get pure, you have that hour to.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. That's certainly one of the themes we're having over and over and over again. Yeah.
And it's
So-
who's boss, who gets to define what twilight is.
Yep. Not authority, certainly. So I think the other thing we're dealing with is what is the fundamental nature of time? And I think, right, I was just reading a piece on this because, right, the feeling of days has changed. Are we all in agreement that days feel different right now?
Sure.
Right. And what we don't appreciate often, because we take it for granted, that time works the way that it works, is that time has felt very different to different people depending on how they divide it up and how they think about it. That time has not always felt the same and humans have not always thought about time the same. And so I think what we're dealing with here is a conversation about what are the divisible pieces of time, of this experience of things changing. And what is the very first divisible piece for them?
Day and night.
When it's day and night, right? And so the real question is, are day and night two binary things?
Daniel?
Yeah.
It strikes me that this is a conversation that is only pertinent when you're considering a Jewish community that is that is in diaspora, spread around the world, because twilight is different depending on where on the planet you are. So, you can be in some northern climes and twilight stretches a really long time. If you're on the equator, the sun drops, it's dark, that's it. And it changes, in different times of the year as well. So I would suggest, they're considering, how do we evaluate this for a community that is spread around the globe? I don't know though, because they're talking about priests at a very specific site. So it gets academic.
So yeah, no, I think you're onto something there, particularly with that priest comment too, right? Like, it's important for us to remember that when they're giving these opinions about marking things with the time of priests or the operations of the temple, that should immediately key into us that we're thinking of authenticity and legitimacy, because there are no priests anymore at the time that they're talking, and there is no temple. I mean, I guess they're Kohanim, they're people with that sort of class distinction, but there's no temple you can go to and watch and judge time based on. Yeah, thank you. And certainly they're dealing with these issues of living in two different societies, and yeah, absolutely.
Danny, how can we, because this doesn't have, the typical tractate look, how do we know when these opinions were written? Were these some of the later, and was it written maybe I don't think would be written anytime in Europe, would it?
Hold on, I don't understand what you're saying, Toby, I'm sorry.
Well, I'm trying to figure out when these opinions were written, because,
You're talking the Talmud right now that we're looking at?
yeah, because what Renee said is very relevant. Because if it was written later on in the discussions from people who were somewhere in Europe, that would be different than when they're all in the Middle East, when they're in Babylonia and Jerusalem.
So they're all in the Middle East, but they are at a significant geographic distance from each other. I mean, like, Baghdad to Tel Aviv is a schlep. It's a schlep today. It was even more of a schlep, obviously, then.
But they're in the same time zone, probably.
I don't know. Interesting.
I think it has to do with the standardization of time as it's relevant to community practice. Because the communities are separated by space, they have to be united through time, since they don't have each other to cue.
Nice. And that's going to be one of the themes we come back to over and over too. Okay, so let's go back to the text in a second, but we're dealing with this question of what is the nature of night and day? Is it a binary that there's night and day, or is there some in-between period, and what is the meaning of the in-between period? And what is the definability of it? So fundamentally, the conversation we're having is a conversation about time. Okay. Someone read, please.
The previous Baraita cited Rabbi Meir's opinion that the time for the recitation of Shema begins when the priests immerse before partaking of their terumah. In the Tosefta, it was taught that Rabbi Meir holds that one begins to recite Shema from when people enter to eat their meal on Shabbat Eve. One opinion of Rabbi Meir seems to contradict another opinion of Rabbi Meir.
Okay, so we get this great introduction that's not in bold that lets us know that we are going to be changing topics totally. So everything you think we were talking about, go ahead and ignore.
The Gemara responds, two Tanaim, students of Rabbi Meir, expressed different opinions in accordance with Rabbi Meir's opinion. So too,
Is that an answer on its own? Is that what they're saying there? That, like, these are two different traditions, two students, one of them's remembering it wrong? Is that what's being said?
It all depends on which opinion of Rabbi Meir they're paying it. Obviously, Rabbi Meir contradicts himself sometimes.
I mean,
Wait, which is the real Rabbi Meir they're actually quoting in the Rabbi Meir that they quote when they have no one else
Yeah.
to quote.
Yeah.
Okay. So
He's
the
the
mythic Rabbi Meir.
Sarah, were you going to say something?
I was just going to say, it almost seems a bit snarky there, given how we know the rabbis think of Rabbi Meir. They're saying, Rabbi Meir can't agree with himself. So naturally, his students are also going to come to different conclusions.
Oh, I like that. Oh, I really like that. Yeah, that's very good.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. I'm all for snarky reads. Okay, let's keep going. Toby is too. She'll tweet it. We'll be famous.
What do you want me to tweet?
That
You're
you're
snarky.
Oh, I am snarky.
We
I
Okay,
am
someone read for us.
Listen, today I told the president if he was going to keep all the meat factories open, the meat processing, that he had to give them combat pay. Not only did they have to get high hazard pay, but he had to make sure that they were safe. Never mind. Don't get me going.
Okay.
Does someone want to read? Yeah.
Renee, go on.
So too, the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, cited in the Mishnah, contradicts the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, cited in the Baraita.
Okay, so now we're entering into a broader discussion of we got some contradictions here.
Self-contradiction. In the Mishnah, I've never done that, of course. Rabbi Eliezer holds that the time for the recitation of Shema begins with the emergence of the stars. From the time when the priests enter to partake of their terumah, while in the Baraita, he states that the time for the recitation of Shema begins when the day becomes sanctified on the eve of Shabbat.
Okay, let's keep going.
The Gemara responds, there are two possible resolutions to the apparent contradiction in Rabbi Eliezer's opinion. Either two Tanaim expressed different opinions in accordance with Rabbi Eliezer's opinion, or if you wish, say instead that the first clause of the Mishnah, according to which we begin to recite the Shema when the priests enter to partake of their terumah, is not actually Rabbi Eliezer's opinion. Only the second half of the statement, until the end of the first watch, was stated by Rabbi Eliezer.
Okay, let's back away from the specifics of this for a second and what's happening here. What is this discussion about?
Contradictions.
Well, they're trying to find a way to get past the contradiction. Either he
Great.
didn't say it and we misunderstood it, or part of it was his, but not the rest of it. And there's no real contradiction. We just don't understand it.
Or which is the authentic opinion and which has been misreported or misunderstood.
Right.
Right.
There's a real awareness here that this whole project has transmission issues. Right? Oral traditions and oral transmission and documents that are compiled and redacted over literally 1,000 years have transmission issues and reproduction issues and all these, right? This is true all over. There's a psalm, I'm forgetting which psalm it is. It makes up Ashrei, 145, 146, something, that it's an acrostic where it's Aleph and then a verse and a bet and then a verse and then a, right? Just like in English, if you started a verse with an A and then the next one with the B and the next one with the C and whatever, there's a missing one for Nun. And there are all of these midrashic explanations for why there's no Nun. And then when they found the Dead Sea Scrolls, it has a Nun verse in it. And so the real answer is the scribe that was copying our version skipped the line. So if that's happening in what we think of as the Bible, it's certainly happening in this much larger project that is the Talmud. And that's, I think, what we're seeing here. Okay, thoughts on that before we keep going?
I think there's a really interesting attempt to reintegrate and solidify authority in the face of this, because we have two responses. When something's uncertain, we can either lean into the uncertainty and say, well, we don't know 100%, or we can double down and say no. And the responsibility on this is placed on the not the original rabbis whose authority is being built up and codified, but it's put on the readers or it's put on the rabbinic students. It's always put off. It's not the rabbis that got it wrong. It's definitely got to be someone else because they've got this.
Nice. Nice. And you've got those, like you divided up those two things, but I think those are actually the same two arguments that are happening right here in the Gemara, right? You have the option of say that one of the students is remembering it wrong, and you've got the option to say that no, it's just the second half of the verse that he was talking about.
So Danny, were these dudes like deadly serious, or were they enjoying themselves writing all this stuff as much as I'm enjoying reading it? Because
no, they were, they were having a blast pretty clearly.
I'm having a blast. This is hysterical to me. I love it.
Right. I love Talmud. It's crazy.
This is hysterical. They're arguing over, like, they're parsing. It's like we do, the Torah study, parsing one word.
Yep.
And then 10 pages about it.
Well,
okay, let's keep going.
I just want to just say one quick thing. It's just such a power struggle of this, No, I want to take credit for when the Shema is being said, or Tamura. It's going to be, it's just so crazy about it.
Nice.
Well, I like when one of the rabbis said, I agree with the other guy who said twilight's an hour, but I don't agree with the specifics. I was cracking up. What specifics? It's 59 minutes and not 60?
Yep. But those are the sorts of ways that they get around it, right? Like that's their solutions. They invent specifics that didn't exist in the original pretty clearly.
And you see time, that's because Bobby, Timex or Rolex was not around yet.
Yeah, there you go. Okay, let's keep going. Did we get to the bottom of this page? Yeah,
I can't remember. Yeah, right?
Yeah.
We're on the top of page 13.
In the Mishnah, that's where we are.
Yeah.
Okay, will someone read for us?
In the Mishnah, we learned that Rabbi Eliezer establishes that one may recite the evening Shema until the end of the first watch. These watches are mentioned in the Bible as segments of the night.
You just said there were no watches, Paul.
Oh, the fun of it all.
Paul, do we agree with?
But it must be established. Into precisely how many segments is the night divided? 3 or 4? Moreover, why does Rabbi Eliezer employ such inexact parameters rather than a more precise definition of time? Tosafot Harosh.
Okay, so that's where this long explanation that goes around a very short sentence in the Gemara is coming from, right? Is from that source. Okay, let's keep going.
So they're going to break down the divisions now, right?
Yep.
What does Rabbi Eliezer actually hold? If he holds the night consists of 3 watches, let him say explicitly that one recites the evening Shema until the 4th hour. If he holds the night consists of 4 watches, let him say explicitly until the 3rd hour.
Okay, hold on. I want to go through these and make sure we understand the math of these. And I want to start by saying that I'm not sure that I understand the math, and so we may end up not understanding the math here. We'll see. Okay, let me tell you what I understand of the way that the rabbis calculate time. I think I mentioned this a few weeks ago also, but probably good to have a refresher, which is that there are 12 hours in the night. Regardless of how long the night is from our sense of time, they're dividing the period of darkness into 12, which is to say that the length of a daytime hour and the length of a nighttime hour are usually different from each other on any given day and are changing throughout the year. Did that make sense? Mm-hmm. But remember that your way of calculating time, how do you figure out time in this era? It has to be around sun up and sundown with a middle. There's not another way. Okay, so if he holds that the night, meaning 12 hours, consists of 3 watches of 4 hours each, 4, 8, 12. Yeah. Let him explicitly say that one recites the evening Shema until the 4th hour. Okay, that math worked, right?
Mhm.
If he holds that the night consists of 4 watches, meaning each
Third
watch is a 3-hour shift, let him say explicitly until the 3rd hour. Okay, great. And we're talking shifts. We're talking work shifts in the temple. It's worth remembering that the job of priest was like gross. I mean, gross, right? And dirty and unsanitary and slaughtering animals and yeah. Okay.
Danny, at the bottom of the page, they have all kinds of notes of this page. They have all kinds of notes about watches, and they were saying that they tried to parallel it to military watches during the night, but then they just go off like the rabbis on
I
tangent.
kind of remember reading that. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, let's keep going.
The Gemara. Oh, go ahead, Bobby.
No, go, Sarah.
The Gemara responds, actually, Rabbi Eliezer holds the night consists of 3 watches, and he employs this particular language of watches in order to teach us. There are watches in heaven and there are watches on earth. Just as our night is divided into watches, so too is the night in the upper worlds. As it was taught in the Barita, Rabbi Eliezer says, the night consists of 3 watches, and over each and every watch, the Holy One, blessed be he, sits and roars like a lion, in pain over the destruction of the temple. This imagery.
Hold on. Let's pause for a second, because maybe that's what the author of the Gemara here meant when they said, and like imagines God roaring like a lion. I wasn't imagining that that was a roar in pain in the destruction of the temple. So I just want to point out that that's not what the text actually says.
Yeah.
Um,
Because it just says later when they quote the whole verse, he roars mightily, not necessarily why he's
Right.
roaring.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, but okay, we've got a interpretation that's on top of that. Yep.
This imagery is derived from the reference in the Bible as it is stated, the Lord roars from on high, from his holy dwelling he makes his voice heard. He roars mightily over his dwelling place. He cries out like those who tread grapes against all the inhabitants of the earth. Jeremiah 25:30. The 3 instances of the root Shin, Aleph, Gimel in this verse correspond to the 3 watches of the night.
Okay, this is a nice little midrash, I guess, is what we're dealing with here, right? But not a very compelling argument as far as I'm concerned. I don't know if anyone else is convinced about three watches from this particular verse.
Well, I have a question. When he's talking about so too is the night in the upper world, is he talking, what's the upper world? Heaven or here?
Yeah, some heavenly realm.
So are they having a dual discussion? What time is like in heaven and what time is like on earth?
Yeah, they're talking about that, and they're also imagining that the heavenly realm is much like their yeshiva.
Wow.
Right. In fact, we looked at 2-3 weeks ago in the previous sort of piece of the Talmud we looked at, there was this whole discussion about what is it that God's doing, right? And God is quoting the rabbis of the Talmud all day.
Oh, right.
Right? Remember that? Except for Meir. And then God quotes Meir.
Right.
And then we
Yeah,
have
right.
the midrash that when you die, and if you've been really good, you get to go up to heaven and talk Torah and study Torah with God and Moses and the rest of the
Yeah, that's exactly
Israel.
that's their imagination. Yeah.
Mine is
Okay, let's keep going. This actually the story kind of keeps going, so let's go with it. Yeah.
And signs of the transition between each of these watches and the upper world can be sensed in this world. In the first watch, the donkey brays. In the second, dogs bark. And in the third, people begin to rise. A baby nurses from its mother's breast, and a wife converses with her husband.
Okay, let's pause for a moment. I first just want to say one of my favorite things about Brachot, which I had forgotten because it's been so long since I've gone through it, is there's a lot of like random mystical journeys that pop up, Like we're gonna get some demon advice coming. I mean, you'll see. Okay, so what's happening here?
The sacred and the mundane are starting to blur together.
I think they're on drugs.
They
Maybe.
don't never nursed a baby though, because my baby never waited till the third watch.
I don't think babies waited.
Exactly. First watch, second watch.
Whenever the baby's
Oh.
good and ready, right? Whenever their tummies feel a little bit empty, they have to let you know.
Yeah.
Well, there's something here about the world that's outside of the yeshiva intruding. You know, oh, let's remember that while we're here discussing all these fine points, our wives and our daughters are doing all the work. So, you know, they're maintaining the structure of life. And so perhaps that consideration should give shape to this particular discussion.
Yeah, I love that. What a great read of that text right there, Renee.
Very
Thank you.
good, Renee.
Yeah. Really, really profound.
Renee, or at least they'd like to pretend that they're connected to the real world.
Yeah, let's mention them at least, you know.
Yeah, no, but like there's little enough of it that we should notice it when it shows up. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, let's keep going.
With regard to these earthly manifestations of the three heavenly watches as established in the Baraita.
Okay, pause for a second. Just a reminder, Baraita are things that didn't make the cut to be officially in the Mishnah, but were Mishnahs, basically. They often are used in a often these mystical journeys start with a Baraita.
Oh,
which
the
probably-
mystical. Okay.
Often, not always, and it's totally anecdotal that I'm saying that, but I think there's probably something that speaks to the editorial process of the Mishnah and when they bring in a
So
Baraita.
when we see the word Baraita, we could think we might be going into the heavenly realms.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes Baraitas are really like straightforward and
Yeah.
legalistic too, so don't get too excited.
The Gemara asks, what did Rabbi Eliezer enumerate? If he enumerated the beginning of the watch, why do I need a sign for the beginning of the watch? It is when evening begins. An additional sign is superfluous. If he enumerated the end of the watches, why do I need a sign for the end of the last watch? It is when day begins. An additional sign is similarly superfluous.
When did he enumerate anything? I don't remember that. Does anyone else
No.
know what they're talking about?
It makes no sense because we've been debating when does evening start? And then we also noticed that evening during the week starts at a different time than on Shabbat.
Evening.
It's later, right? I think I remember. I may not.
Okay, let's keep going. Let's see what happens.
That he enumerates it.
The Gemara answers.
Yeah, maybe.
The Gemara answers, rather, he enumerated the signs for the end of the first watch and the beginning of the last watch, both of which require a sign, as well as the middle of the middle watch. And if you wish, say instead, he enumerated the ends of all the watches. And if you say that a sign indicating the end of the final watch is unnecessary because it is day, nevertheless, that sign is useful.
A little Freudian.
Unintentional smart.
Reads the opposite of what's there.
Yeah.
This is like food. This is
Earth is heaven, heaven is earth.
So right,
Useful is useless.
what they're saying is they're not sure which one he meant, but whichever one was right was the one that he meant. Right? That's what they're saying here.
Yeah, go for that one. Go for
Why?
that.
Wait. Why does he need
Don't hit it.
Danny. I have a serious
the
question.
middle of the middle watch?
Danny, so I got a serious question about the whole thing. is there like a narrator who puts this together?
So it happened. I really believe that in some ways, not in the lowercase d democratic nature of it, though that has changed too, but in some ways this is like Wikipedia, where over the course of 1,000 years, people are reading this and copying this and inserting themselves into the conversation. And so what's happening is you're in the middle of a conversation here, and someone 200 years later is studying this and copying it and thinks, hey, but why did they even bother to talk about this? And so then we get 3 paragraphs talking about why did we bother to talk about this? And then it returns back to the actual conversation that had been jumping off. Does that make sense?
Yeah. The whole wiki thing makes sense. Yeah.
And in that sense, like that's what I love about the Talmud, that it is the literary project of the Jewish people for 1,000 years.
But nobody adds to it now, right?
So that's an interesting question, right? Like no one adds to the Talmud. I'm trying to figure out I'm going to turn off the screen share. There we go. No one adds to the Talmud now. But the moment that the Talmud is compiled and finished, the period of commenting on the Talmud and explaining what it meant begins. And then the tradition of that is codified as Rashi. Rashi takes all of those traditions over the next few hundred years and creates a commentary on the Talmud that is the codification of them. And then every time you print the Talmud you look at a page of Talmud today and the inside column is Rashi. But the moment Rashi is done, the students that come out of the Rashi tradition called the Tosafists begin the process of commenting on Rashi's commentary. And then that gets printed. And then this whole cycle has not stopped. Right, look at Sefaria today and all of the different commentaries, Sefaria.org, and all the different commentaries that link to the Talmud that didn't used to link to the Talmud, and they all speak to each other now. So all of which is to say that like the moment of one thing becoming canon, like the Talmud is done, or the Bible is done, or even when we go back to the construction of the Bible, right? Like the Torah is done, and then the section known as the prophets were done, and then only later was the section known as the writings done, right? Like the moment the canonization happens is the beginning of the creation of the next canon.
Now, where do responses fit in this?
Yeah, again, right? Like, what Toby's referencing is there's this whole literature that emerges after the codification, canonization of the Talmud that's sort of practical, legal, situational rulings using the Talmud, but for our everyday life, where like the joke we did Bava Metzia for 2 years, and it began with 2 people come with a valuable lost item, both clutching it. They both say that they found it. Who gets it? And 2 years later, we're no closer to answering that question, much farther away from answering that question. The shuvot or responsum or shelot, or there's a few different names they go under, that Toby's referring to are exactly that. Someone writes a question and says, who gets it? And the answer is person X, right? With an explanation. So that also begins, once those things become unwieldy, the chuvot or the shelot or these responsum, right? These legal rulings, once they get too unwieldy that no one can go through all of them, then you get the creation of what we call the law codes. That's the word. Law codes, like Maimonides' Mishnah Torah, or the Shulchan Aruch, or more recently the Mishnah Brura, or all of these, which are basically compilations that are authoritative collections of case law that then the next body of case law can be built on top of. Did that make sense to me?
Yeah, and following up on that, so like modern rabbis or recently modern rabbis, like I always heard about the rulings of Reb Feinstein rules that. So are they codified somewhere? Are they kept somewhere?
So yeah, right. The next generation in some ways determines what the previous generation what of the previous generation becomes Torah, what becomes authoritative, right? So yeah, sure. We have all of these rabbis, and in the liberal tradition, like you have examples like Heschel, Abraham Joshua Heschel, right? He's certainly a part of the canon within the liberal Jewish tradition of today. Nechama Leibowitz, who we talked about this last Shabbos morning, right? Part of the canon in a different kind of way in the Orthodox world, right? Like you have these processes. So within their generation, it's who listens to him and who cares about him, right? Like people follow his rulings because people followed his rulings. And then because every one of his generation followed his rulings, the next generation reveres him. Because that is an overt statement within Orthodoxy and I think, just statement of a lot of human psychology in general, that antiquity and authenticity are the same thing often, or one leads to the other.
Why
So in
is,
some form or another, we're still building on the Talmud.
Yes, which is itself building on the Mishnah, or the Gemara building on the Mishnah, which itself is building on, which is, right, like, and the thing is, and when I've taught who wrote the Bible kind of stuff, I call it Story of Us. I'm going to do that again soon, I think. The real theme that I cover over and over again with it is that that's true of the Bible too.
Mm-hmm.
This also is like that, where it's never done and there's no original. There's no like first moment of truth that we can go back to. Everything has its precursors, and every storytelling is new. Renee, you look like you're going to say something.
Yeah, I just had a thought about, in the last passages that we read, the word of the use of the English word enumerate, which has the word, numerous number in it. And, we are so used to thinking in terms of the quantification of time. That, I think, is very much of a much later development. There's no Greenwich Mean Time. There were no time zones. They didn't even know how to, measure longitude until the 18th century, late 18th century. So, I think there's something going on there in that the word for counting in Hebrew and the word for telling a story have the same root. And
Nice.
so it's not so much that you're quantifying or enumerating but it's more like you're relating and you're giving details to describe. Now that leaves, of course, a whole lot more room for interpretation, in which all of these rabbis are perfectly happy to jump into the pool and splash around. So I think we've been distracted by that enumeration thing.
No. This was a good conversation, I think.
can I ask a quick question, Danny? On this,
Please.
other than the watch for the Shema, which I can totally get, what do you need the other 5 or 6 different watches for?
Rolex, Timex,
I know, yeah, Cartier.
Seiko.
Okay,
SCL.
Paul, I don't understand your question. Will
Okay.
you?
Okay, you're saying that there's 3 watches, or during the night, or the 4 watches.
Mhm.
What is the significance of the watches, other than the fact for the Shema?
So, right, yeah. This is a great question, because remember that the core issue that they're overtly dealing with here, and I think again the overt topical issue is not actually what they're really talking about or what they really care about, but the overt issue there is how many biblical time periods existed as a way of arguing about the Shema in their moment, and when you can say it or when you can't say it. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
So that's why it matters how many watches there were, even if what we're talking about is an event that maybe never happened. Like maybe it has nothing to do with how the watches actually happened at the actual running of the Second Temple. And maybe entirely this is the imaginings of the rabbis of how the Second Temple worked. That's the other thing to remember here. Okay, should we
Thanks.
do a little more text? We have a few more minutes. Okay. Nope, I think we read all this, right? Yep.
Yeah. What is the practical ramification of this sign? It is relevant to one who recites Shema while lying in a dark house, who cannot see the dawn, and who does not know when the time for reciting Shema arrives. That person is provided with a sign that when a woman speaks with her husband and a baby nurses from its mother's breast, the final watch of the night has ended, and he must rise and recite Shema.
Wow, I think this is exactly Renee's reading from before, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Maybe they heard Renee.
You know that, I mean, people didn't measure time the way we do. You know, when what's time to feed the baby? When the baby cries.
Right.
When you see, well,
When do you milk the cow?
when the
When the
cow
cow needs
is
milking.
flowing because the cow needs to be milked. You pay it. And I think that people at that time were probably much more attuned to shifts in the natural order. They paid more attention to that. So they notice, okay, this is the time when all the birds start to sing. So it must be such and such an hour, or this is a time when, you know, the cows need to be milked because they're all complaining, or this is a time when somebody in the family communicates with you because they haven't heard from you in a while. Then it's the end of the night. I don't know.
Or the rooster crows.
Yes, there's that. And then, you know, I think people say things like, let's meet at dawn, or I'll meet you at noon, or at twilight, or something, you know, or I've even heard people in other parts of the world say, okay, so the season of the long rains has just ended, so therefore you should be able to see this phenomena at this time. And I'm going like, wow, you know, I don't even know what they're talking about. But there are places in the world, and there are other times when people are much more attuned to those natural phenomenon.
Okay, maybe we'll go ahead and end there.
Okay.
I think that's a great ending point.
Could you put a mark there, Danny, so you remember for next week?
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out how we can do that. Actually, let's read one more paragraph. I think this next paragraph still has to do with this topic, and that's the end of it for a little.
Ephah. Rav Yitzhak Shmuel.
Yeah.
Keep going, Bobby.
Said in the name of Rav, the night consists of three watches, and over each and every watch, the Holy One, blessed be He, sits and roars like a lion. Because
so this is given in the name of a different rabbi now.
Right. Well, Rav Yitzhak Shmuel said in the name of Rav.
In the name of Rav. Wasn't it Eliezer before?
Two different rabbis now?
Yeah, different, similar tradition though. Yeah, keep going.
Okay. Because the temple service was connected to the changing of these watches, and says, woe to me that due to their sins, I destroyed my house, burned my temple, and exiled them among the nations of the world. So now God is talking, I guess.
Yeah.
This is what God calls out. This is what God roars about.
Due to our sins, He destroyed.
Yeah, so interesting. Look, that one before that we commented on, that it had this whole overlay.
Mm-hmm.
It was just pulling it from this later paragraph, right? What we've really got are two different traditions.
Yeah. So does
We're
the
trying to weave together.
Hold on, Sarah and Toby were both talking. I couldn't hear either.
Go ahead, Sarah.
Oh, thank you. So does the destroying, the burning, and the exile line up to each one of the three watches?
Huh. Yeah, I guess that's the logic here. Yeah, I guess. Yeah, nice.
Yeah.
Well, there's something here about how to observe these things in a post apocalyptic world, you know, a post, you know, destruction of the temple world. How do you make it relevant when the temple is gone?
You do it on Zoom.
Amen.
Okay, friends. 7 o'clock tonight. I hope people will join me. This whole month we've been rotating through the different rabbis. Tonight we have this confluence of Yom HaZikaron, Israeli Memorial Day, and Yom HaTzmaut, Israeli Independence Day. And taken together, they're sort of the Israeli high holy days. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at them and use them as an opportunity to talk about what is the meaning of peoplehood today, what is the meaning of relationship with this thing that is the Jewish state, and in particular, what does it mean to be an American Jew observing the Israeli high holy days?
Are you streaming it or it's going to be Zoom?
Both, yeah. I mean, join the Zoom, be a part of the conversation. Just join the link at the website, just like you joined this one.
Okay.
7 o'clock. See you then.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you, Amy.
Thank you, Rabbi Daniel.
Thank you.